Emeritus at Leeds and working also with Liberty University right now. And we're just privileged to have him here. He really knows his stuff, and he really presents it in a God-glorifying way. And I think Andy be first to say this is not about him or about anything to do with him. It's about giving glory to Jesus Christ and the God who's created all things. And that's why we're here today, to be edified in our worship of the Creator. So let me just open us up in prayer and ask God to be with us. Father, we thank you for bringing our brother here with us. We thank you for sorting out the technical issues, Lord, and we pray that you would be presented
Thank you, Christian. Thank you ever so much to Troy as well. And sorry, it's a little bit awkward with having a Mac, but at least I got my cup of tea. You know how to make it. Over here, you still know how to make a cup of tea. They don't in these Boston Harbor and all that. So we're going to be looking at flight, the wonder of feathers and flight. And what I want to do is just to share with you some sense of wonder as to what's going on. There are some amazing things that we could talk about in flight. I'll just introduce it by saying that I've worked for many years in the aircraft industry, and I don't know whether I'll be able to claim back the time that we've lost, so it may go a bit over the hour, over the clock hour. What I'm saying, it may be an hour from now, but we'll try and reclaim some of the time, so you have a bit of time to have a break before the following session. So I've worked in aircraft industry. I worked at the University of Leeds and in England. I did quite a bit of work on combustion and aerodynamics and thermodynamics, and I'm in fact still working in that area a bit, as you'll see in the second talk, which I will just refer to some other work that I'm doing in thermodynamics and living systems. So can I just say thank you so much for your prayers. Many of you I know pray for my work. Thank you to Pastor Elliot. I think you're at the back, sir. Nice to see you. By the way, George McTiernan, who I've just been in touch with, specifically sends his greetings to you. It's nice to see you, sir. And I mentioned it to the other elders. I don't think they know George McTiernan, but you do, evidently. And I'm going to be doing something with him. That's why he was emailing me. He wants me to speak on creation to a Zambian African group. So there's a lot of stuff going on with creation. And interestingly, a lot of people that you didn't expect to take an interest in it really are. And underneath all this, so you don't get the wrong idea, is the issue that it's the authority of the scripture which is at stake. Even though I love talking about science, and I'm going to be talking about flight and everything, what's really underneath it is the greatness of the scriptures. If I just pull out here, I've got my good book here, which I think I've got misplaced. Here we are. You know, the authority of the Bible is what's at stake. And we need to see that believing the Bible is really all you need. But of course, in the apologetics, you've got to deal with the science to show people that the science really is consistent with a biblical position. One last point, and that is this: if you pray for me, I'm in a debate, written debate. I've completed my sections and so have the others. I won't say who they are, I might say it to some of the leadership here. But there's people on the biblical side, right, debating one another at the European Leadership Forum, which I'm part of. And there's people in the science which are debating the science side. I'm debating a theistic evolutionist and an old universe, young earth person's most odd position. Within the theology network, I've got friends of mine who represent the young earth position, and they're debating, again, I won't say the names, not publicly anyway, people who sincerely believe that the Bible is not to be taken at face value, and that somehow you can make the days be long periods of time, frankly, in my view, misusing what the scripture actually says. So I'm in the midst of that. So I'm trying to represent both in the science and in the theology, because I've written the book Genesis for today, a biblical and scientific position which supports the young earth, young universe position. I feel often on my own, but there are others who agree with me. Answers in Genesis, Creation Ministries International, worth getting hold of their literature. I'm afraid I haven't brought all the books from them with me, but you can look them up online. So let's dive into our subject, but I just needed that word of introduction so you realise what I'm doing with the talks today and tomorrow. Not far from here, I just some years ago now, it's 11 years ago that I saw the Blue Angels at Miramar, not far away as I say. Flight is spectacular. Let me just show you this. For us, it all began when you had two guys who were not aeronautical engineers. What were they? Ah, got you. Say it louder if you know. They weren't aeronautical engineers. What were they?
Bicycle.
Bicycle engineers, that's right. And they took on the Smithsonian. And they won and the Smithsonian lost. But where do you find the Wright Flyer today? Anybody know? If you want to go and see where the Wright Flyer is and the aircraft that they made, the first one which flew, which was powered flight, where can you find it? This is an irony. Where do you find it? In the Smithsonian. That's right. I always find I laugh and I think, they lost and they grabbed the prize of the anyway. But they did very clever work. Wilbur Wright, who was the older one, he really was the brains behind it. And he was copying something. What was he copying in order to get his ideas? Anybody know?
A toy helicopter.
Say again?
A toy helicopter?
No, not in his case, but there are people who've done that. But in Wilbur's case, what was he copying? Birds, that's right, that's the answer. He was observing the birds, not where he lived, although I'm sure he did watch them in Ohio, but where did this flight take place, which was the famous first flight? Say again? North Carolina, that's right, Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, Kildeville Hills, and if you go there today, you can drive there, it's easy. But in his day, on their day, they had to get a boat from what was then the edge of the North Carolina coast and go across with all their equipment to the Kildeville Hills, and it really is spectacular just seeing what they did. Anyway, they managed it, and they did a tremendous job on that first day in December the 17th, 1903. And here's a little video, actually, of them doing the work. I'm not sure it's this I don't think is the first flight, but it might be. But it's a very old grainy film. Just watch it with me just for a few minutes. So from 1903 we get to about 2003, in 100 years, I'm afraid it's now been grounded, as you can see. I'm showing you a picture of the brilliant Concorde, which for many reasons had to be eventually grounded. But it was a tremendous 100 years of flight that flight of Concorde there marked. This is on its last flight before it was grounded. So flight is an amazing thing that we take for granted today. I got here using standard airliners, which people would, the Wright brothers would never have realized that it would get to the stage that we're at now. So I want to just speak to you on feathers, then I want to speak about some of the issues to do with control, hovering, the muscle structure, breathing, and then I'm going to end by some clever systems which birds have. So the first thing I want to say is that location is all important with feathers. You've got to realize that all feathers on a bird, any given bird, are different. There's no two feathers on one bird which are the same. You get mirroring, obviously, you've got two wings, and so what happens on one wing happens on the other. But as you look down on those feathers, the ones which are in green on the edge, these are the primary feathers. We have a pet budgerigar, but you don't know what a budgerigar is because you've just so messed around with the language. You haven't a clue what a budgie is or a budgerigar, but actually you call them parrots. But a parrot is always a term we use for big birds, but you call these little ones parrots as well. The proper word is budgerigars. Now, Robert over there, he knows what I'm talking about because he comes from my part of the world, but you don't know what a budgerigar is. It's a small bird. Anyway, we've got this bird, and Juliet, my wife, loves birds, and I like them as well. And what we had done, and you think it's cruel, is that we had cut off the primary feathers, so the bird couldn't fly, right? And it would just sort of try to fly, but it would just come down again. Gradually, of course, those primary feathers begin to grow again, and they are on our bird, Charlie. And he's gradually getting these big feathers, and now he's climbing up into the room. We let him out from the cage every day, and we're training him to actually come to us when we want him to come, and he is, and he's beginning to get obedient. Well, you know what I mean. And now not only have you got primary feathers, as you move out from the primary feathers, you look just on the green bit here, you come to secondary feathers, then you come to tertiary feathers. Then as you go forward on the wing, you've got covering feathers or covert feathers. Then you've got greater coverts, lesser coverts, medium coverts. And as you go forward on the wing, you're actually forming an aerofoil. So it's not just what you're looking down on, it's what you see from edge on, which is all important because you're forming a shape which is made of feathers. And indeed, when you look edge on at what I call an aerofoil here, you're actually moving the flow over the wing and you're turning the flow, and it's the turning of the flow which actually gives you this amazing shape which causes there to be lift on a wing. So it's not just looking down on the wing that you've got to have all the feathers in the right place. You've actually got to have the shape end on such that you can actually see that there is an aerofoil shape for the wing. Here is, again, Pastor Elliot will love this. This is his home country, the Isle of Mull, just off the mainland Scottish coast. They've reintroduced huge birds, which are even bigger than your wonderful bald eagle. This bird is the white-tailed eagle, which is even bigger, and it has an 8-foot wingspan. It really is gigantic. And it's been reintroduced. It was lost for many decades, hundreds of years, I think. But it's been reintroduced from Scandinavia, and it's beginning to really literally take off. And the white-tailed eagle shows here this wonderful curvature that I've been mentioning of the aerofoil shape. You can see it on the leading edge of the wing there. So these are pictures that I took some years ago when we were up in Scotland. We love to go up there, and we love the country, and we went to the Isle of Mull. We're going to go to Scotland again this year, not to the Isle of Mull. We'll go to the Isle of Skye, where we really appreciate the beauty of that part of the world. Here you can see the birds is with ease turning. The F-18s that I showed you earlier, yes, they were flying an awful lot faster. We grant you that, and they can go supersonic, which birds can't do. But in terms of versatility, birds win hands down because they are moving their wings. We have aircraft which can actually change their shape. It all started with the F-111 years ago, and years before the F-111, we in England had the TSR-2, which you probably haven't heard of, but it was also had movable wings. But it's very crude, even with the aircraft that you do have in the US. They're still very crude compared with birds. When you come to the red kite, which is not quite as big, but it's another bird of prey, you can again see this incredible movement of the wings, the movement of the feathers. You've also got winglets at the end. And by the way, the winglets have been copied again from the birds. You'll see on Boeing 737 Maxes and also quite a lot of the other aircraft like Boeing 777s, Boeing 787s. They have winglets at the end. Now the winglets are clever designs which were on birds to begin with, and people have realized that the birds knew what they were doing, a bit like the principle of the Wright brothers with flight. Right at the beginning, they copied the birds, they copied the camber of the birds. They, of course, with the Wright brothers, were using ropes to change the shape of the wings, and by changing the shape differently on the right than the left, they could control and maneuver their original Wright flyer. Things then moved on, and we have modern aircraft today, jumping right on to about 20 or 30 years ago. People again looked at the bird wings and realized that they had these winglets at the end, like is shown with the red kite, and was also shown with, you can see it operating there with that white-tailed eagle. You can see the winglets at the end, which are feathers which are sprayed out, some of them going upwards. They then realized that what the birds were doing was actually reducing the drag that you always get from a finite wing. If you had an infinite wing, obviously you can't, but supposing you did, then you wouldn't get the drag from the lift just spilling off the wing, which then causes these vortices. So the birds reduce that drag. It's called a special type of drag. It's called induced drag. And they reduce it by having these winglets. By copying that, the aviation industry has reduced the amount of fuel that is used, particularly when you're gradually coming into the holding pattern in order to land. So let's just move on a bit and say, well, where did feathers come from? The evolutionist says that feathers came from the reptile scales. And you seriously have people suggesting that scales of a reptile eventually produced feathers. Now, I've got a feather here, which I think I may have shown this when I spoke some years ago to the young people. But if I just pass this round, I won't try and do it with one of the young ones out here because of time. But you might just like to experiment. I'll pass this feather around. It's an old feather. It's from a buzzard, actually. And if I just separate the barbs here, you will see that the barbs are connected, which I'll show you a picture of this in a few moments, bigger on the screen. But you can actually see that the barbs which I have separated come together again because there are many barbules which you can't see connecting the two sides of where I separated it. So I can do that, right? You can do that. I don't mind what you do with this feather. Be nice to have it back at the end. But, don't try and eat it or scrump it up or something. But what I'm asking you to just pass it round, and I want you to see that if you look at it closely, you can see it's very furry either side, and you can then join it together, right? And what's happening is it's something rather like Velcro, but right down at the microscopic level, and it's attached again. So one feather is a remarkable example of lightweight engineering. So just one feather, right, is sufficient to knock over any idea of the evolution of flight. Now, of course, there are thousands of feathers, I've already said, on a bird. And on some birds, it's reaching, 10,000, it depends what bird it is, but it's certainly in the thousands. And then you've got birds, we'll show them in a minute, who are a lot smaller than eagles, tiny little birds, right? And you need to learn this word, I've got a budgerigar. You need to say that in the shower so you learn English, right? Troy, you now know what a budgerigar is, right? So anytime you go to England, say, have you got a budgerigar or a budgie, right? Okay, you need to get it, right? So, but these budgies, we call them budgies, have got hundreds, thousands of feathers themselves. But I'll show you a bit later, hummingbirds, which are really wee, right? You can get very tiny hummingbirds. You have them over here, we don't have them. But they're just miniature versions of the same principle. So can you just pass that round and play with it and you get the point as to what I'm saying. So when people say that scales caused feathers to occur, that is just, frankly, it's really nonsense. But you've got people actually saying this in books where this Japanese gentleman, Fatuma, said years ago, a book on evolutionary biology, he says the feather has the same fundamental structure and development as a reptile scale. Is he right? No, he's actually wrong. And the reason he's wrong is that a feather grows like a hair, by the way, from underneath the skin. I won't pull my hairs off because they're very precious. Right? The Lord God, when he's counting my hairs, only needs to send a minor angel to count mine. He doesn't need to send Gabriel. Some of you have got so much, you need archangels to count your hairs. But, but the hair that we have, all of us, comes from a follicle underneath the skin. Scales are different. They don't grow in follicles. And this is the detail which, of course, shows the foolishness of what Fatuma said. You won't be able to see that from where you are, so I'll just give you the schematic diagram. Really what's happening is that feathers grow in a tube, right? And the tube is called the feather cylinder. So I've got some feathers here, and I'll just demonstrate the principle. So imagine my big pen casing there is the follicle. The feather then grows in the follicle, and then eventually it comes out. in the right location. And of course, birds will molt, and they have to have, like my little budgie is gradually growing its big feathers, and it's really getting strong. And I'm looking forward to going home and seeing Charlie really flying high. Then we'll have to get a bit of doweling to get him to come down. But it's great seeing that the birds actually regrow their feathers. But all the feathers come from individual follicles like this, right? And they grow inside the follicle. I've sped it up, obviously, just to demonstrate the principle. And then they come into the location which is needed. Once we had a bird which we nicknamed Humpty because it fell out of a tree. Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall, right? So, and sadly, the bird died because we didn't realize what we needed to do to keep it alive. And I was told later that what we should have done was fed it on something like Lucozade or Coke, something with sugar in it, and it might have survived. But anyway, we learned that later. But while we were sort of looking at this bird, it was very tame, and we picked it up and tried to look after it, but we didn't manage it. But you can see on the right, can you see the shiny bit? That is the follicles of the feathers coming out because it was a very young bird. Now, to the point that I mentioned earlier when I showed you this feather that is now being passed around, remember I said that if you split the barbs, you can actually make them come back together again. This is what's going on at the microscopic level. If you look at that picture, underneath the words construction of a feather, you can see blown up as a sort of diagram is the main stem, or what we call, the technical term is the rachis, and then coming out from the rachis, the main stem. Are you with me? Have you gone to sleep yet? Put up your hand if you're asleep. Okay, right. Just checking, right? But you can see what's coming from the rachis, the stem, is the barbs, right? The barbs you can see on the feather going round, okay? What you can't see, I do have a pointer which I can use. I did have. Yeah, here it is. What you can't see is the barbules, right? Now, if you see these are the barbules, right? And the ones on the other side of each barb, those are the barbules. And this is the brilliance of the engineering, right? Everywhere you look, basically, it's the same message. Irreducible complexity. If I did my talk on the ear, which I did yesterday down in Santee, I could talk to you about the irreducible complexity of the ear, the irreducible complexity of the human voice. But now I'm talking about the irreducible complexity of just one feather, right? And you can see here that there's the barbs, and then coming on the left-hand side are barbules coming down. As imagine you're coming down one of those barbs. On the left-hand side, you've got barbules with hooks on. But now look at the other side. The barbules on the right-hand side have ridges on. So that means for two adjacent barbs, listen to this carefully, the left-handed barbule with hooks slides over the right-handed barbule coming from the adjacent barb, which has got ridges on, just like your curtains. Some of you ladies and fellas, got to be unisex these days. You know, sorry, I'm just pulling your leg. But you get curtain hooks going over the curtain rails, right? So it's the same principle. Or think of it like Velcro, except you haven't got brushed nylon on one side. You've got a sliding system. Well, that is clever. That means, as I showed you, that the barbs hang together. So isn't evolution wonderful? Really? Because you've got to say, if you believe in evolution, that this system evolved. But then you've also got to say that, amazingly, the frayed scale that Fatuma was trying to say evolved into a feather somehow worked out that you had to have left-handed frayed bits, which are the barbules, being different to the right-handed barbules. Well, everything's telling you there's no way that that can happen. This shows that there is brilliant engineering involved. And of course, not all feathers, by the way, are load-bearing or flight feathers. We call, the technical term is that feathers like that are pennaceous. They're there for flight, primary, secondary, tertiary, and some of the covering feathers. But then you get downy feathers, which are nothing to do with flight, they're to do with warmth, right? And so this is what you actually see down the microscope. You actually see the feathers that I've been referring to and that mechanism. So frankly, the feathers are really amazing in the way that they work. Now, let me just show you this. If you go back, supposedly, in evolutionary terms, I don't believe in evolution for a moment, as you know, but supposing you did believe in long ages, what do you find in terms of feathers? This is supposedly 99 million years old. It's not, but let's just take that just for the sake of argument. You find exactly the same system of hooked and ridged barbules sliding over one another in feathers which are meant to be that old. In other words, they've always been there in flying systems, even if you were to accept the millions of years, which of course I don't. So the evidence is pointing away from the evolution of flight. It's basically saying, even if you did accept the long ages, that flight has always been flight, feathers have always been feathers. They didn't come from scales, as people try to make out. So we could say that, as Proverbs says, answer a fool according to his folly. And in a sense, that's what I'm doing here. I'm saying, I'll give you the millions of years and we'll talk about, what really the evidence shows. Then the next verse in that book of Proverbs says, don't answer a fool according to his folly. There is a time and a place for when you actually do say, well, look, let's take your reasoning. And then you show that actually it doesn't work. And frankly, underneath, there are, of course, assumptions which they're clinging on to, and they're refusing to allow their presuppositions to be challenged. By the way, if you've got feathers, you've got something which is sliding over a sliding mechanism. You who are engineers, and I've got to say this not just to the fellas, but to the ladies, because you may have lady engineers here, right? So we mustn't be sexist. That's what we're being told by those in authority. But anyway, engineers here, and actually I do know some lady engineers, so let's say everybody here. Don't put up your hand if I'm not asking for that. But I'm asking you a question. If you've got a sliding mechanism, then you're going to get wear. So how do you stop the wear? Or how do you make it just, not wear out very quickly? What do you need? If you've got in rotation systems, you've got to make sure that you have something there to lubrication, well said. Lubrication is needed in this case because this creature, the bird, needs some means of actually getting lubrication. And that comes from a special gland at the rear of the bird, where the bird gets the beak onto that gland and it spreads the oil over its feathers. So the bird's got to have a 180-degree turn ability, and birds can do that easily. Often you'll see a bird roosting with its head on its back. It'll just bend its head over and go to sleep. Here the bird is using that ability, a pelican in this case, to get the oil from the base of its spine. Now we can't do that. I can barely turn my head a few degrees. I can't turn it right over. Perhaps some of you are brilliant gymnasts and can do it. Maybe Christian in the morning does his exercise and turns his head 180 degrees. Is that right, Christian? I bet. So, we can't do that. But these are things which a bird must have in order to be able to do what it does do. Now look, I just need to point out that some birds have very special feathers. And when you come to owls, they have quiet feathers. Any bird which flaps makes a noise, right? Even owls make some noise, but it's very, very much reduced. I just want to show you that there are clever systems that birds have. If I get time at the end, I'll play you a video which actually shows you how owls fly exceedingly quietly. We'll come back to that because I do need to move on to my next point, which is that flight needs control. How do birds control their flight? Well, they do it by having not ropes and pulleys, which is what the Wright brothers did, but they have, and of course, the flight that now we have today doesn't use ropes and pulleys. We have special flaps at the back. You have forward slats at the front in order to control flight. But birds actually just simply change the shape of their wings by muscles. So there is a remarkable changing of the shape of the wings, which is nothing to do with, screws and pulleys and things like that, even though we originally were actually doing just that, trying to simulate what the birds were doing. The Wright brothers were doing it. But they do have the ability with muscles to change the camber of their wings. The other thing that birds do is have, I've already mentioned the winglets at the end, but if you look closely on here, you can see that there is yet another feature that birds have, which is these feathers, which sometimes are quite a few feathers, 3 or 4, sometimes up to 7, which are connected to the structure underneath which is supporting the wing, the skeletal structure. And the whole wing is actually being supported by the equivalent of the hand that we have, with very long bones. There's 3 bones, and the equivalent to our thumb is there. And that is the alula feather. And that acts like a leading edge slat to reduce the danger of actually having a stall. That's when the lift is lost from the wing. So birds have this alula feather, which is very, very important. You can also see it on this example, which is your kestrel, the American kestrel. You can see the alula feather there. And what happens is that it acts like a leading edge slat, and you'll notice that when an aircraft takes off, right, if I show you this next picture, which I am adding on the right, you can see here the leading edge slat. There's the flaps at the back, but I'm now talking about the leading edge slat. You'll see that those slats come out at takeoff, and you also usually have something like 15, 20 degree flaps. So you're really changing the shape of the wing, and you're allowing there to be some air come through this little hole there. And that is deliberate in order to avoid the wing in high lift condition suddenly losing lift. And if you took those slats in at the wrong time, and that has happened in accidents on takeoff, the aircraft suddenly loses lift and crashes. Famous accident near Heathrow way back in the 1980s was due to that. The pilot made a mistake, put the slats in early, and sadly the aircraft crashed. Then there are other examples of control. There is another little device which birds have, which is, I'll use the term, but I'll have to explain it. The term is eddy flaps. Now, the bird actually is using these automatically because there is a sucking motion as the air goes over the top side of the wing. And because the feathers are very light, it actually automatically will have the effect of lifting some of the wing feathers. And that's happening on this skua, and as it's flying at quite low speed, it's actually lifting the feathers. Well, the effect that this has is to stop the stall, the loss of lift, going forward to the whole wing. So it's actually a clever device. We don't normally use them, but you can have eddy flaps. They're not often used on airliners today, but you can have a deliberate flap which you lift such that if you're in a high lift condition, relatively low speed, you can stop the stall from actually developing and going over the whole wing. But birds have an automatic eddy flap, which is really quite, or I've called it here an anti-stall flap. Probably some of the features which you really, though, do enjoy is birds which hover. And of course, the ones which really do a great job at hovering, they're not the only birds that hover. The kestrels hover, and they hover by flicking their wings. And you can see, certainly in England, going up and down we call them motorways, like your freeways, in the central reservation, that gets forgotten. And there's lots of animals there, lots of rodents, and you'll sometimes see, you'll see a kestrel. You've got an American kestrel I showed you earlier. Our kestrel is a bit dowdy by comparison. It's usually just brown. And it will flick its wings like this, and it will balance against its wedged tail, and you'll just see a shimmering bird, just stationary, hovering. And that's a very clever aerodynamic maneuver because it's actually balancing against its tail and it's flicking the end of its wings like this. And you'll just see a shaking motion of its wings at the end. And so kestrels are very, very clever flyers. And then they'll suddenly dive and get a rodent or a mouse or whatever that they can see there. But the ones which really, I think we really enjoy seeing are the hummingbirds. And I had the privilege of going to the Caribbean some years ago, and they had beautiful hummingbirds there, and this is one of them that I saw. This is actually a red-throated hummingbird. It doesn't look red because it's an iridescent color, and it was in the dark, or at least the light wasn't shining on the front, but it's actually, here's another picture of a ruby-throated hummingbird. There's the same bird there. And they have the ability to hover by a different principle. What they're doing is they're actually, remember I said that most of the wing is the equivalent of the hand. They do have a short forearm, but the radius and the ulna is actually being used, and then they have a very short little bit here, but the main wing is the radius and the ulna and the hand which is supporting the feathers. So what they're doing is they're actually twisting the whole wing right over to 180 degrees, such that if you look on the tip of a hummingbird, you can actually see this figure-of-8 motion. But they are doing it so quickly that they actually hum, as the word, of course, as you'd expect. You know more about this than I do from your own experience. No doubt you have nectar feeders or sugar water feeders outside your front door, ready for the summer when these birds, they're already starting to come. I heard somebody mention that he'd seen a hummingbird even in this month. They're beginning to come. And they are wonderful in the way that they hover. So the whole motion of the wing is actually different for a hummingbird because it's got a very short part on the shoulder. It's not really it's not like that for most birds. The hummingbird has actually the ability to twist its whole arm right over, which other birds can't do. And it's twisting it at a rate such that it can do the motion with its wings at something like 50 to 60 times per second. And if it's in the mating season, the male will deliberately go further than that, right up to 100 times per second, and make a particular noise which attracts the female. So at the same time as it's beating its wings at a fantastic rate of 50 to 60 normally, then it's also getting nectar from a plant with the tongue coming out at 5 to 10 times per second. So no wonder hummingbirds normally eat or drink their own body weight per day. They're very, very light. They only weigh a few ounces, but they are nevertheless extraordinary in terms of getting energy, using it exceedingly quickly, and needing sugar to be replaced very, very quickly indeed. So some of these pictures I'll just show you of this time. It's a blue-throated hummingbird where the video has been taken very, very fast frame rate, and you can actually see the twisting over of the wing and then coming back again on this picture. This is the one that I saw in the Caribbean. It's called the Antilles crested hummingbird. So it's a picture that I took myself, and you can actually see it's got this little crest, the shimmering green, which is iridescent color, but that crest on top, actually, when you get the light on it, has a most odd effect as you see it. Then there was another hummingbird, and this was the this is the green-throated hummingbird on the right there. Let's just deal with the issue of the tongue of a hummingbird. Because in order for this bird to evolve, if it was to evolve, and I don't believe for a moment that it did, but if you're going to suggest the evolution of a hummingbird, you've got to make sure that the creature has the ability to get its food. Well, one thing which is essential is that not only does it have the ability to hover, but it must have the long beak. And I'm going to show you the tongue in a moment. That tongue's got to be a very special tongue to go into the plant to get the nectar. Supposing it had got just one of those features, like the ability to hover, but it hadn't got the long beak or the right tongue, can't get into the plant, that's the end of that evolutionary experiment. But supposing the next time the evolution which has got no mind has got the long beak, maybe it's even got the tongue as well, but it hasn't got the ability to hover. Well, it just comes in at 20 miles an hour and goes straight through the other side. That's the end of that evolutionary experiment. So, do you see what I mean when I say there is irreducible complexity? By that we mean that you've got to have every feature in place in order for this bird to survive. Not only that, just like with all other birds, it must have the wings made of feathers, which have the barbules, right, and the barbs, all in the right place. All that's got to be right. It's got to have the ability to turn its head 180 degrees. And for hummingbirds, it's got to have the ability to twist its wings right over, which actually is a special feature at the joint, which enables, it's a bit like a ball and socket joint that hummingbirds have, in order to actually twist its wings right over and to get lift, even when the wing, normally you do that motion, right, for birds, but it doesn't do a flapping motion, it does a twisting motion. So all these things have got to be right. Let me now show you the tongue for a hummingbird. You can see the tongue being stuck out there in that little video clip. Now watch this video, which shows you the tongue of a hummingbird, and it's only in the last 15 years or so been worked out what the tongue is doing. The tongue is not what people thought. They thought that it was a pair of straws because the tongue splits and goes into the fluid, the nectar, and they thought that the bird was sucking up nectar. Oh, no, it's not, because it's going in so fast, 5 to 10 times per second, while the wings are beating 50 to 60 times per second, right? And it's going into the fluid, the nectar, and it's not sucking. It would be too slow to do that. Watch this video, which explains what's going on.
The hummingbird's tongue is about twice as long as its beak, so it can reach deep into a flower. And until recently, many scientists believed that the birds relied heavily on capillary action to draw the nectar through their tongues and into their mouths. Kind of like water spontaneously rising up a thin straw in glass. But some fascinating discoveries at the University of Connecticut have shown that the mechanisms involved are much more dynamic than anyone realized.
The hummingbird's tongue is actually a nectar trap equipped with a pair of narrow tubes that taper sharply. The tip of each tube is segmented into a row of flaps that are attached to a supporting rod. When the bird isn't eating, these flaps form 2 rows of closed loops that fit compactly into the beak. But when the hummingbird feeds, its tongue undergoes a dramatic transformation. Inside the flower, the tongue extends to make contact with the nectar. When immersed in fluid, the tip splits and the flaps on each fork systematically unfurl. Then, as the tongue is withdrawn, the flaps close tightly to seal and capture the nectar for delivery into the bird's mouth. This entire process is executed automatically in less than a 20th of a second, thousands of times a day.
I think you'll agree with me that that is extraordinary. You see, all these things have got to be right for this creature to supposedly evolve. Everything is telling you that this isn't the case. Even those who believe in evolution admitted in this article that the findings could affect thinking about how flowers and hummingbirds have evolved together. That's another interconnected point. You've got to have the flowers there. Since the shape of the flower, the composition of the nectar, and the shape and workings of the tongue must, they've admitted it, this is not a Christian, they must all fit together for the system to work. That is irreducible complexity. They're basically admitting it without using the term that Behe coined, irreducible complexity. So it's interconnected system, it is actually irreducible complexity, no evolution. I need to hurry on. I'm probably not going to be able to finish, but let's just get the basic points over to you. Bone and muscle structure. Did you know that the bones of birds are hollow, except for diving birds? Birds like your loon bird and the puffins, which I've seen out in Alaska, the wonderful tufted puffins which you see there, their rear of the bird especially is solid, the bones. But most other birds, 90% of the birds have a hollow structure. So the bones being light is actually a very important matter. We have heavy bones, but the bones of birds although hollow, have got to be strong. So you have a Warren's truss arrangement inside, bit like design of bridges. If you've got a steel girder going across a great distance, you give it strength by having these trusses. It's called in aircraft the Warren's truss arrangement. Remember, I mentioned the tufted puffin. There it is. That's when I was out in Alaska once. And you could see it struggling to take off because it's actually got a slightly heavier structure than other birds. Diving birds do need to have solid bones for that. But let me say something else about the structure of birds. Not only must you have the skeleton right, and I mentioned that there are effectively the wing is made of the hand of the bird, but it does have a small little shoulder system, bit like the top part of our arm. Then most of the wing is actually this part, the radius and the ulna, which we have as well. And then it has not 5 bones, it's usually about 3 bones, which they haven't shown them all there. But what I do want to just point out to you, though, is this amazing breastbone. The breastbone has a muscle structure going around it, and this is shown here. The muscles of the bird are connected, the main muscles for flight are connected with the breastbone. So if I'm simulating what a bird's doing, you'd have a breastbone sticking out here, which is what you carved against at Thanksgiving, okay? You put the turkey or whatever it was you had, and you put it on its back. It's dead, of course, but you carved against the breastbone, right? Now, what's interesting is that it hasn't just got one muscle like we've got. It's not a very our breastbone is nowhere near as marked as a bird's, but we have a pectoralis major muscle that you use when you're swimming or when you're playing tennis, right? Or when you were as a child, and hopefully you don't do it as an adult, you punch your sister, or you went like this. That's the pectoralis major muscle. But a bird has underneath the pectoralis major muscle, it has another muscle which we don't have, and neither do reptiles have, which supposedly are the ancestors to birds. Here's this other muscle. Can you see it? It's this muscle which loops over. It's not a bird doesn't have a proper shoulder like we do. It has a coracoid system, right? It has a humerus bone, which I've been referring to, which is our humerus here. But the humerus is not very long, and I said to you that the radius and ulna dominates on a bird wing, and it has a small humerus bone here, right? Now, just see this muscle. This muscle is the muscle for pulling the wing up, right? It has the pectoralis major muscle coming down, and it has the muscle I'm referring to, which is the supracoracoideus muscle for the upstroke. I hope you can remember supracoracoideus. You know what's coming. At least Christian knows what's coming. There'll be a test afterwards, and Christian will mark it. Or maybe Troy will, right? But no, I'm just pulling your leg. But you've got this motion to lift the wing. And then you've got the pectoralis major muscle to pull it down. So the wing is actually controlled by 2 muscles. Isn't that amazing? Because this means that the bird can operate its flight, which is demonstrated here. I'm not going to be able to do more than this video just to show you, but can you just see it's now pulling it up, and then it changes to the pulling down, right? Pulling up was the supracoracoideus muscle on. If you couldn't quite see that video, you can see the still from that video here. This is the upstroke. That's the muscle I'm talking about, which is extra in a bird. This is for the downstroke. So birds have a whole system of muscles Time won't permit me to talk to you about the ligaments which support the rest of the wing, some of which are extra to what is in reptiles. For instance, I'll just show you this, okay? This is the extra muscle here, which controls what's happening at the main wing. They have this extra ligament which connects the base by the coracoid right across the wing. So it's going right across the front of the wing. And as I mentioned to you, the skeletal structure is not composed really of 5 digits. It's either 2 or 3. They have the humerus and the ulna, which I mentioned earlier, and the humerus, sorry, at the get it right, the radius and the ulna, which is this bit, and then the hand, essentially. So all this, the special tendon, is absolutely essential for a bird in order to control its flight. So when people try to argue that bird wings just somehow evolved, they are really not thinking straight, because there is no system like it in reptiles. And very briefly, the breathing is different in birds. We breathe using an inverted tree arrangement with two lungs, but a bird doesn't have that system. Birds have this system, which you can see on the right, where the air is perpetually going through. It's what's called a counterflow mass exchanger. The bird's air is constantly going through. It's never stopping. Whereas when we breathe in, our air stops in the alveoli tubes that we have, whereas with birds, they are actually, they don't really have that system at all. It's a totally different system. And they actually have a system of air sacs which is attached to even their hollow bone structure, such that they are perpetually full of air which is circulating. Just briefly, what's going on is that the air is breathed in through the trachea just like we do, but doesn't go straight into the lungs. It goes to a rear air sac. Then when it breathes in again, that packet of air which it had earlier breathed in starts going through the lung. Then the next time it breathes in again, the air that we're following then goes to a front air sac ready to be breathed out. And then when it breathes out again, the second time, that goes round. So it's got it needs 2 breathings in and out to get one packet of air through the system. And it's constantly circulating. Not only that, the trachea is split into 2, which means that it doesn't have a larynx, it has a syrinx, because it's got the equivalent of a larynx in both parts of the split trachea, so it can sing 2 notes at once, which is why you get such beauty in birdsong. So there are so many things more that I could say, and I think I'm going to have to leave it there, because I'm not going to be able to give you the other clever systems. Suffice to say, if I'd had time, I would have talked to you about the colour which is on birds, which is full of iridescence, not just pigments, but iridescence. What I will do, though, is simply say this, that even though it's a clever system which is to do with the way the light is reflected, that what I will do is I won't be able to describe that in depth, but I will just say this, that God said to Job, "Have you an arm like God? Or can you thunder with a voice like him? Deck yourself now with majesty and excellency, and array yourself with glory and beauty." Everything shows that birds were made to give glory to the Maker who made them. And of course, you might well argue, well, surely not everything is glorious, because there are birds of prey. Like I mentioned, the kestrel. Well, here's a kestrel which is feeding on a rodent. You say, got you. That things are not full of glory and beauty. Where did that come from? it wasn't there in the original creation. The original creation was good. When man fell, death and suffering not only came to man, but it came to the animal world as well. We look to the Lord Jesus Christ, who bled and died that we might be forgiven. And there is coming a day when Christ is going to make a new heavens and a new earth wherein dwells righteousness. And all the predator-prey relationships which remind us that we live in a fallen world will eventually be reversed. The wolf will dwell with the lamb, it says. Whether or not that's reality, that's literal, it certainly shows that God is going to bring in a new heavens and a new earth. Let us be those then who believe in the Lord Jesus Christ as our Creator and our Savior. Thank you so much for listening. I'm sorry I had to rush a bit because we had a bit of a late start, but thank you ever so much, Christian.
Thank you, Andy. I know people want to ask him questions, but I'm just going to ask, can you give him a few minutes to eat his lunch? Is that okay?
Oh, it's okay. I'll take the question.
Okay, well, we're going to we have snacks and coffee on the patio. We're going to be back here at 4 o'clock for the second session on DNA. Just keep praying and enjoy.
So if you'd like to ask me any questions, we're saying that you ask them privately during the year. Yeah. So I'll be around and I'll be very happy to do so. Can I just take a picture for a record of our meeting? Is that all right? Well, you haven't said no. So that's a lovely picture. Thank you. I do like to just show people where I am and what we're doing, and people pray for me back home. So it's just lovely to have. Sorry, I didn't get you in over there, but I'll do a special picture of you guys over there. Lovely. Okay, the Lord bless you all. And if you want to ask me questions, feel free to do so.